You are now watching Surveillance. Donate or subscribe for more sick twists.
Hello everybody, thanks for joining me. So this is going to be a re-release of my Shadowmourne Quest guide, Shadowmourne Infusions guide video. We're going to cover a lot of stuff that we didn't cover the first time, especially heroic. If you're aiming to do these infusions on heroic, we're going to cover that as well. We're going to cover a few mistakes that got into my first video, so we're going to fix those. And we're going to try to make this a lot shorter and easier to manage. So I wanted to get this video out about 2 weeks ago, but I've been having this issue with my graphics card where one of the fans doesn't want to spin, not very fast anyway. And I was having some issues when every time I try to render, my graphics card would overheat or thermal throttle. So now that I've got that figured out for now, until I can go ahead and get a new GPU or get the fans fixed, I went ahead and put this video together for you guys. Finally got it rendered. So let's go ahead and get started. So the very first thing to talk about is the changes to the Shadowmourne Quest line that Blizzard made. I also made a video about this already, if you guys want to go check it out. But just in the sake of comprehension, we're going to cover them again. So, Shadowmourne Quest line is made a lot easier now. You can get it a lot faster. If you're lucky, it's going to take you about 5 weeks. If you're unlucky, it's going to take you about 7 weeks. And if you're average, it's going to take you about 6 weeks. So the first major change is that Shadowfrost shards will no longer require a player in your raid to be on the Splintered Throne. As you'll see later, this is the quest where you start gathering these shards. You need 50 of them, and once you have 50, you get your Shadowmourne. This is probably the biggest major change, because before, you needed to have that quest so that you could start getting them to drop. This is what really cuts down the time it takes to get Shadowmourne. Also, Heroic is going to have the same drop rate as normal now, which helps out anybody who's still struggling on Heroic. The final boss of each wing, so Saurfang, Lana'thel, Putricide, Sindragosa, and the Lich King himself, will now always drop a single guaranteed Shadowfrost shard, both on 25 normal and heroic. This essentially means that you're always guaranteed to get 5 per raid, so even if you got no other shards to ever drop, it would take you 10 weeks. The Primordial Serenite are now more obtainable. I don't think this means that they increase the drop rate in raid. The drop rate still seems kind of low, but you can now purchase them for Emblems of Frost, or you can purchase them from doing Gamma dungeons from the Scourge Stone currency, which is basically the new Sidereal Essence. What this does is it means that you don't have to save up a bunch of money for your Shadowmourne anymore. You can just farm dungeons until you get enough Serenites to get your 25 and get your Shadow's Edge. It also means that guilds no longer have to combine their Emblems of Frost on the first few weeks to get their Shadowmourne wielder a Shadow's Edge. They can now use those early emblems on their tier sets. So they say that the new timeline is somewhere from 8 to 10 weeks compared to the previous 18 to 24 weeks. I think both of those are an exaggeration. So back in 2010, the Shadowmourne was gated behind bosses not being out yet. So Sindragosa, Lich King, some of these guys weren't out yet at the very beginning of ICC, and this was kind of what gated you from completing the infusions and getting your shards going. So I think the average is closer to 6 weeks now, and we have seen that through lots of data about everybody has Shadowmourne already. The average seems to be about 6 weeks, as long as you full clear every week. I think you can typically expect to get 8 or 9 Shadowfrost shards per raid. If you're lucky, you might get 10, 11, or 12. If you're unlucky, you might get 6 or 7. So that's pretty much all the changes to the quest line. Let's go ahead and move on to the very first quest, the Sacred and the Corrupt. So in my previous video, I was using this Wowhead Shadowmourne Quest guide. Honestly, it's a little bit dated. It's kind of written in a way that's written for people trying to get Shadowmourne in retail. So I'm just going to totally avoid that. We're just going to look at the quests themselves on Wowhead, and I will cover everything there is to cover about these quests. So the very first quest is called the Sacred and the Corrupt. Now this one is going to require that you are friendly with the Ashen Verdict. Now at this point of the game, you should all be friendly already if you've been doing ICC, but if not, maybe you could find a ICC trash rep farm or something to that regard. Otherwise, you basically just have to keep doing ICC until you get friendly, which should not take very long at all. So once you're friendly, pick up this quest from the very beginning of the instance from High Lord Mograine. He's going to give you pretty much all the quests until the very end. He's right at the entrance, hard to miss. So what you need here is you need 4 things. You need Light's Vengeance, Primordial Serenite, 25 of them, and you need Festergut and Rotface's Acidic Blood. So the Serenites are obviously the easy part here. You just get 25 of them either through buying them or through running dungeons and then spending your Scourge Stones on them, or you could even spend Emblems of Frost on them if you have extra Emblems of Frost. They're pretty simple. Then the Fester Gut Acidic Blood or the Rotface Acidic Blood, these will drop from those bosses on 25 person only. So all of these quests need to be done on 25 man. All of the Shadowmourne quests throughout the entire quest line all need to be done on 25 man. So don't get disappointed if you don't see the blood dropping on 10 man. It has to be done on 25. Now, these acidic bloods are a single item, an epic item that drops off of them as long as one person is on the quest, and only one person can loot them. It's just a single item. It's not like a quest item that you can just pick up off the boss. It's not personal loot. It is raid loot. So you're going to need to make sure that the raid, gives you the bloods if you're the person who is designated to craft Shadow's Edge. So now that you have your bloods and your Serenites, the last part of the equation is to get Light's Vengeance, which is a quest item that drops from an RP event that you can do in Dragonblight as long as you're on this quest. So here's the location on the map for where you're looking to go. It's right in the northeast corner of Dragonblight. It's called Frostmourne Cavern. So you're going to fly in here. It's very, very simple to do. You can basically solo it. You don't need any help from a healer or a tank. So the first thing you're going to see is a little bit of a role play. Lich King will come out and say some words. This part is just kind of waiting around for him to finish his little role play. After this, you're going to get a bunch of ghouls to spawn. Now, they only have 4,000 health. They die very, very quickly. Again, easily soloable. Once you've ran around and killed all the ghouls, you're going to loot Light's Hammer. It's not actually going to let you have it yet, but you're going to loot it, and that's going to progress to the next part of this RP. So the next part is you're going to have an elite crawl up out of the ground. Very, very simple. He's only an 81 elite, so easily soloable again. You have a few friends, make it even easier, and he goes down pretty quick. He's only got 150k health. Now, all you got to do is loot Light's Vengeance off of the ground, and you're done. And if you decide to do this with anybody else like I did, don't worry, you guys can all loot it off the ground, not just one of you. So you don't have to do it multiple times for multiple people. Just, you can all loot it at the same time. So, now that you have your Bloods, you have your Serenites, and you have your RP Hammer Light's Vengeance, next thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go back once again to the very beginning of ICC and talk to High Lord Mograine one more time. He will award you with your new weapon, Shadow's Edge, a 264 eye level axe. And you're going to need this axe to complete the very next part of the quest chain, which is called a Feast of Souls, also gotten from High Lord Mograine at the entrance. This one is pretty straightforward. It doesn't need much of an explanation. He wants you to take Shadow's Edge and slay 1,000 enemies inside Icecrown Citadel. So every time you attack a mob inside of ICC with Shadow's Edge, it's going to apply a debuff to them, draining their soul upon death. So every ICC full clear gives about 200 souls. So you're going to need about 5 clears. If you do 25 man and 10 man every week, you should get around 400 souls a week. So it should take you around 2.5 weeks. So despite what I said earlier, this actually is the one exception to the rule and the one quest that you can do in 10 man as well as 25 man. Now, these might be a little bit harder to find these days now that we're 6 or 7 weeks into ICC. However, there are occasionally trash farms, rep farms that you can join where you can farm about 40 to 45 souls every time you clear all the trash all the way up to Lord Marogar, and then reset the instance and go again. So this can actually drastically speed up the time it takes you to get 1,000 souls. For me, I did this while I was farming Exalted for my Exalted ring, and I got Exalted around the same time as I got my 1,000 souls. So if you can do that, highly recommend it. Speeds everything up a lot faster. If not, it'll take you about 2.5 weeks to complete this part of the quest and move on to the very next portion, which is the Unholy Infusion. So now we get to the very, very fun parts of the video, the infusions. So these are going to take a little bit longer to cover because there's a lot to talk about with each one. Now, all 3 of these infusions need to be done on 25 man. They don't have to be done on heroic. They can be done on normal or heroic. But if you're going to do them on heroic, there's probably a little bit of extra precautions that you want to take. So the very first one is the Unholy Infusion, and this is going to be on Professor Putricide. The idea here is to enter the Abomination, which is done by clicking the potion on Putricide's table behind him. 4 seconds later, you will turn into an Abomination, and you're going to complete the role of the Abomination throughout the fight. And on the Abomination's bars, you're going to see 4 abilities. If you have Shadow's Edge equipped, the 4th ability will be number 6, but it won't show up if you don't have Shadow's Edge equipped, so make sure you have it equipped before you start. It's very, very important for all these infusions that you have Shadow's Edge equipped for the majority of them. So 1, 2, and 3 are your normal Abomination abilities that you're going to use throughout the fight. Number 6 is your Infusion. So this requires 100 energy. So the Abomination has an energy bar on the right side. And if you get to 100, you can cast number 6, which is a 4-second cast. It will give you a 6-minute buff. And then all you need to do is kill the boss within that 6-minute window. It's also very important that you do not die. If you die, you will lose the buff and you will not complete the infusion. This is going to be a trend that we will see on other infusions as well. At this point, it should be safe to take off Shadow's Edge if you want to off tank or if you have a better weapon to use. Okay, so the main core part of the fight is performing the role of the Abomination, so let's cover the abilities that it has. Number 1, which is going to have Keybind 1, is your Eat Ooze ability. So periodically, Putricide will spit slime puddles throughout the different parts of the boss room. And what you're going to do is you're going to run over on top of them as the Abomination, and you're going to soak them up by spamming the number 1. Every time you soak up one of the puddles, you will gain energy. And you will use this energy to cast your number 2 ability, Regurgitated Ooze. Now this is a 50-yard range ability that you can use on the oozes that spawn throughout this fight. There's the green ooze and the red ooze, and you can slow them down with this ability. It costs about 45 energy to cast. It has a really long range. It deals quite a bit of damage over time as well, and this is going to be how you complete the fight without dying. You're going to slow the oozes down so that the raid can handle them. Now, the slime puddles will grow periodically over time. They will continue to grow if you are not drinking them or eating them. So one trick that you can do if you need extra energy for your number 2 ability is you can let them grow a little bit before you drink them and get them gone. Essentially, you can drink them down to the very smallest puddle, let it grow a little bit, and then drink it some more. However, I would be very cautious doing this, especially on Heroic, as it's very easy to get overwhelmed by the slime puddles and end up having them fill up the room or get behind and just not be able to catch back up. This can also be a method for getting extra energy leading up to and right after you do your infusion. So the final ability is your number 3, which is your primary damage dealing ability. It is Mutated Slash. Basically, this is a Devastate. It sunders the boss. It doesn't stack with Sunder or Expose Armor. And it also does a lot of damage. Now, all of these abilities are on separate global cooldowns, so you can use them all at the same time. This means that when you're drinking a slime puddle, it's often very effective to bring the boss next to that slime puddle so you can hit it with your number 3 at the same time as you drink the ooze with number 1. Now, one final thing to mention here is that the Abomination does a lot of damage with its auto attack. You can do damage with your auto attack and your number 3 ability while you're drinking a slime puddle quite easily. However, this auto attack will not start on its own. It will not start when you use number 3. It needs to be started by either having a start attack macro or right clicking on the mob. Otherwise, your Abomination will just not auto attack and you might not even realize that you have it. This is quite a lot of damage to be missing out on, so you want to make sure you're auto attacking whenever possible. So here I will play a little bit of my point of view doing the Abomination on Heroic. This is on 10-man, but it is Heroic. Now, this is not when I did my infusion. However, this point of view is going to be invaluable for our purposes, showing you the role of the Abomination. So on the pull, first thing you're going to want to do is go straight to where the boss is standing and click his little table to give yourself the debuff. It's going to turn you into the Abomination, and it's going to put a disease on you, but don't worry, it doesn't do any damage. Don't let anybody dispel it, because if they do dispel it, it's going to pull you out of the Abomination, and you're pretty much going to wipe. So make sure nobody dispels you. Now, as you can see, the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to rush these slime puddles and drink them with 1 while you hit the boss with number 3 and your auto attack. As you can see, it does quite a bit of damage. A very good thing you can do is to buff the Abomination with stuff like Blessing of Might, Battle Shout, Kings, whatever. Very good. One of the things that we like to do to have more energy going into the transition on Heroic is to not slow the first green ooze and to save energy for that transition instead. Also, if you have a Resto Druid or a Disc Priest, They can use stuff like shield or rejuvenation on you to help you gain a little bit more energy, because when you get a rapture proc or a rejuvenation energy proc, it will actually give energy to the abomination. This can really help with energy. So as you can see here, we hit the transition at 80%. Now this is the main difference between the heroic and the normal versions of this boss from the point of view of the abomination, is that on heroic at 80% and 35%, instead of getting stunned, he will spawn a red ooze and a green ooze at the same time. These transitions are pretty much the parts of the fight in which you might die, so you want to make sure you do them very clean. The role of the abomination here is to slow the oozes during this transition. Now you might only have enough energy for one ooze, and if you have to pick, usually you're going to want to slow the red ooze, and everybody else is going to burst down the green ooze before it ever becomes a problem. Now the best time to do your infusion, whether you're on heroic or normal, in my opinion, is right after that first transition. After you have both of the oozes handled, you're going to wait for the next red ooze. You're going to slow it, and then immediately after that, you're going to drink to 100, ignoring any oozes that spawn during that period, and then infuse. As you can see here, the abomination is still vulnerable to the choking gas bombs, which will make you have no hit and miss a bunch of attacks. So make sure you're watching out for those. As the abomination, I got hit by one right there. And your goal here, as you can see, is not just to slow the oozes with your number 2 ability, but also to deal damage to them. Anytime there's an ooze up, you want to be dealing damage to it as the abomination and helping the raid get those oozes down ASAP, because they are the dangerous part of the fight. Abomination's auto attack and number 3 just deal so much damage, and also sunder the armor off of these oozes so that the physical DPS do a lot more damage really quickly. Now when you infuse, you're going to spend a full energy bar. The next ooze that comes after that, you're not going to have enough energy to slow. So you want to call this out. Be communicative with your raid and let them know, hey, I'm infusing right now. The next ooze is not going to get slowed. Pop your cooldowns. Make sure it dies faster than usual. Now, if you're on normal and not heroic, you don't have to worry about the phase transitions and making sure you have energy, at least 45 energy, for 80% and 35%. Now, as I said before, the red oozes are more dangerous, so you're going to want to make sure that those are the ones that you slow. When you do your infusion, a good time to do it is right after a red ooze, because the next ooze, the one that you won't be able to slow, will be a green one, which are much more manageable when they're not slowed. In my opinion, this is just the safest strategy that you can use. So after 80%, ideally you would slow a red ooze and then go ahead and drink to 100 and infuse. The red ooze explosions are a little bit more dangerous, and these ones do not stun their target. They can be kited, so having a slow on them is a little bit better than having it on a green one. Also means that if you only have enough energy to slow one ooze during the transition, you should probably slow the red ooze instead of the green one. Now, once you've infused, you get your 6-minute buff, and at 35%, the boss will begin his transition into phase 3. After he finishes transitioning and transforms, he will kick you out of the abomination, and all you need to do is survive for the rest of the fight and kill the boss. At this point, you can take your Shadow's Edge off. If you have the buff, you're good. Just make sure you don't die. That's pretty much it. You're going to use your 1 to drink puddles to get energy. You're going to use your 2 on the oozes to slow them down. You want to really make sure you have slows for the red oozes on heroic transitions. And then after that first transition at 80%, whether you're on normal or heroic, you're going to want to infuse sometime after that. Typically, after slowing a red ooze, drink to 100, cast your infusion, and then continue the fight as normal until you get to the kill. Then your infusion will complete, and you can move on to the blood infusion, which is our next quest in the chain. So the blood infusion in my book is really the easiest one by far, whether you're on heroic or normal. It's really, really easy. So all you have to do for this is to subject yourself to her blood mirror, which is a debuff. And then after that, you need to bite 3 different people. Now, this is going to play out very, very similarly on both heroic and on normal version. It's just that the normal version goes a lot faster. So to ensure that you get your 3 bites, you might need to slow DPS. Now, we'll talk about that a little bit later. So the very first part of this infusion is the blood mirror debuff. You need to have it at the very beginning of the fight, just for a little bit of time, not any specific amount of time, but you just need to get it and then lose it. So the way that this debuff works is it's applied to the main tank, and then whoever is closest to the main tank will take 50% of the damage done to the main tank as shadow damage. Now you can use Shadow or a Mastery or Divine Sacrifice or any number of other cooldowns to reduce the damage that you're going to take while you have Blood Mirror. But once again, you're only going to have it for like 1 second. So it's really not that dangerous. When I did it, I really wasn't taking very much damage at all. Now, after you lose the Blood Mirror debuff, which by the way is going to happen just from moving out of range, as soon as somebody else becomes the closest target to the tank, aka the off tank, they will immediately get the Blood Mirror instead of you, and it will fall off of you. Now, the next thing you're going to notice is that you have a new debuff called Gushing Wound. This is the main mechanic in which you will get your infusion completed. So essentially, this is a stacking debuff, and you're going to get your first stack from the Blood Mirror on the pull, and then your next 3 stacks you're going to get from biting people with the Vampiric Bite. If you get to 4 stacks, the debuff will go away, and all you need to do is kill the boss, and your infusion will complete. Now, this is going to reduce your damage dealt by 10% for every stack, so you're going to be doing less and less damage as the fight goes on. This is going to reduce some of the extra damage that you get from the bite. Now, if you're having trouble beating the enrage timer on heroic, this infusion will make it harder by reducing your damage from 10 to 30% throughout the fight. It also may be harder just due to the fact that you may not be the most optimal bite target for the first or second bite. Now, you can also note that it does inflict damage per second to you, and this amount will go up with every stack that you get until you get your 4th stack and clear the debuff totally. If you use Bubble or you get hit with a Hand of Protection, you will actually remove this debuff and screw up your entire infusion, so do not clear this debuff by any means necessary. Now, unlike the Unholy and the Frost Infusion that we'll see later, there is no 6-minute buff, as far as I can tell, on this infusion. So you probably need to have Shadow's Edge equipped for the entire fight. I don't know for sure about that, but I would bet that that's probably the case. So let's talk about the bite mechanic for a second. So the Vampiric Bite is the mechanic on this fight. Basically, when you're bitten, you're going to do double damage and deal no threat. Now, another thing about the bite is it does about 10,000 damage to whoever you hit when you're biting them. So make sure that they have enough health and don't kill them with the bite. You can actually, especially like on later bites when a lot of people are being bitten at the same time, it's not bad to just like throw up a D-sack just to mitigate all that damage. It can also crit, and when it crits, it can do like 15 to 16,000 damage. So don't kill somebody with the bite. Make sure that they're topped up first. You can even call out, hey, take a Hellstone, I'm trying to bite you. That kind of thing. Now this is going to last for 1 minute. And then after that 1 minute, you're going to turn into a vampire, and you will have 15 seconds to bite somebody else who does not already have the bite, giving them the bite buff as well. Now, if you don't bite somebody before your 15 seconds runs out, you will become mind controlled, and the raid will have to kill you. It goes without saying that if this happens to you, you will not be completing your infusion. So make sure you know who you're going to bite before you have to bite them. When you turn into a vampire, your number 1 ability on the new action bar will be your Vampiric Bite. There is no other abilities on the action bar, so nothing else to worry about, just your number 1. Sometimes, if you have trouble with the keybinds, you might have to click it, or use a macro /cast Vampiric Bite. After you've bitten somebody, your 1 minute bite debuff, Essence of the Blood Queen, will be refreshed, and you have another minute to do double damage before you have to bite your next target. It is very, very good to have all the bite targets selected before you pull the boss. Now on 25-man, you will normally get 5 total bites. On heroic, on normal, you might only get 4. And as we get further and further into the expansion and have stuff like better gear and the ICC buff, you might end up only having 3 or 4 bites total. So there may be some situations where you need to slow down the damage on the boss just to make sure you get your last bite out and complete your infusion in time. Now, this is really easy to do. All you got to do is, when you get to 15%, stop all damage until you get your 3rd bite, and then kill the boss. If you are doing the boss on normal, this is probably something you're going to have to do. So if you are the first bitten person, then the 4th total bite will be your last one to complete the infusion. If you are a 2nd round bite person, then the 5th total bite will be the 3rd one for you where you complete your infusion. Now, you can really do this as first bite or second bite. It doesn't really matter. It's just that if you're second bite and you're doing it on normal or you don't get 5 bites total, you will have to slow DPS like I already said. So at the very beginning of the pull, you are going to run in there with your tank, stand on top of the tank, make sure your off tank is not in yet, and get the Blood Mirror debuff. Essentially, as long as you're closest to the tank, you will get it, like you see I got here. As soon as you get it, move out, and your off tank should move in. As soon as your off tank becomes the closest target to the main tank, they will get the Blood Mirror debuff, and you will lose it. That's when you will get your first stack of Gushing Wound, and then you can take it from there. All you need to do now is get 3 bites. Once again, a good place to use DSAC or Shadow AM or Pain Suppression or any of those things is right on the pull when you're getting Blood Mirror. But it really isn't that dangerous. Now, the very, very first bite is done by the boss and not another player. Now, the way that she decides her first bite target is she always picks the highest threat that is not a tank. Now, this has been a little bit of a debated topic ever since I put out my first video, but I can promise you it is a threat mechanic, not a damage mechanic, but it is with a few caveats. So the Blood Mirror debuff cannot get bitten. If you have the Blood Mirror on you at that time, you cannot be bitten, and this is to prevent the tanks from being bit. So anytime you have that Blood Mirror debuff, she considers you a tank and not a valid target for the bite. Now, this makes things a little tricky if you want to get the first bite for your infusion, because you have to get the Blood Mirror and drop it as soon as possible so that you're a valid target for the bite again. Now, this is where it gets a little bit tricky, because sometimes she will bite number 3 on threat and not number 2 or the highest non-tank threat, because she still considers you a tank even after you've dropped the Blood Mirror debuff for a good amount of time. And one of the things that we noticed is that anytime this happened, it's because the threat position that I was in did not update on the threat table. So if I was second on threat, right under the tank, when I had the Blood Mirror debuff and stayed second on threat the whole way to the bite, she just wouldn't bite me. She would still consider me a tank. But anytime my threat position changed or updated, like if somebody passed me briefly and became the highest threat and then I passed them again, then it would work just fine. So it seems like there's a little bit of wonkiness there with the Blood Mirror debuff. You might need your threat position to update for her to consider you a valid target again. That's based on everything we've seen so far, looking at logs, etc. That's the current theory for how it works, and I'll show you exactly what I mean. So here's a screenshot of right when the bite went out on one of our infusion pulls. As you can see, Formidable ended up getting the bite. That's our Fury Warrior. He wasn't second on threat. As you can see, I'm way above him. He's not the highest damage either. And he's number 3 on threat, so he's below me. So she's still considering me a tank, even after I have gotten rid of the Blood Mirror debuff for quite some time. And on this pull, I was number 2 on threat, the whole way from the Blood Mirror debuff, all the way to the bite. So my threat meter position did not change at all. So it seems like if your threat meter position changes at all, somebody briefly overtakes you, etc., or if you don't start climbing until after you drop Blood Mirror, it seems to work just fine. It seems like that will force her to update her tanks and who's a valid target, and consider you a valid target for the bite once again. Now, we actually have quite a lot of evidence in support of this theory, at least so far from what I've seen. Here's another pull, as you can see in the top left corner. A few seconds before the bite went out, Toe Chairman, our off tank, passed me briefly, and I was pushed down to 3rd on threat, and then I climbed back up to 2nd and successfully got the bite. It seems that changing positions on the threat meter table allowed me to force her to update her valid target list and consider me not a tank and a valid bite target once again. And just for good measure, here is the 3rd screenshot, another time where I did not get the bite even though I'm clearly the highest non-tank threat. I was 2nd on threat the whole way from the start of the pull till the bite. It seems like that she just never updated me as a valid target as a result, and it ended up going to 3rd on threat, which was our mage, Splud God X. Now, I could show you screenshots or logs of this all day. We have so much evidence in support of this theory, so I really do believe that this is how it works. It makes sense, too. It makes sense that changing positions on the threat table will cause her to update her list of valid targets. It just makes sense that it would be coded that way. So I really do believe this theory for now, at least until I see some evidence that goes against it. If you're not doing the infusion and you never get the Blood Mirror debuff, it will always go to you as the highest non-tank threat. It just seems like it's the Blood Mirror debuff that is screwing things up for getting the first bite. So if you really just want to sidestep this issue entirely, there's a couple things you can do. One of the things you can do is to just wait to climb on threat until after the Blood Mirror debuff falls. Or you can just be the second bite. You don't have to be the first bite. You can still easily do your infusion as the first bite, and you'll have no problem whatsoever. It's just if you're on normal, or if you're doing this way further down the road when everybody's doing way more damage, you might have to slow DPS to get your last bite. But that's really not hard to do at all. Now, since the bite always goes to the highest non-tank threat, a really good way to ensure that you get the first bite, if that's what your plan is to use stuff like Righteous Fury, Defensive Stance, or Frost Presence, or whatever abilities you have to increase your threat, just to get under the tank so that you're the next person. You don't want to pass the tank, obviously, and if you use something like Righteous Fury, you might actually pull a lot of aggro really, really fast. So you have to actually go kind of slow and make sure you don't rip off of the tank. Now, since a lot of the damage on this fight comes later in the fight when everybody's bitten and not just one guy, one other thing that you can do to ensure that you get the bite is to have your whole raid just either go very, very slowly or just not attack until the first bite goes out, which is very, very early into the fight. That way you can always ensure that the one guy doing damage will probably get it because he's the only person generating threat. Now, there is also another thing to be concerned about here, and it is stuff like Tricks of the Trade or Mirror Images on a mage. These are things that can cause the threat meter that you see in-game to be a little bit different than the threat meter that she has when she's keeping track of who's the highest non-tank threat, right? So if you use something like Mirror Images, your actual threat value is not going to show on the threat meter for everybody else. And it's very, very easy for a mage using Mirror Images to steal the bite from the person who is actually the highest threat on the threat meter that you see. So tell your mages not to use Mirror Images. If you're going to use tricks on the pull, put it on the tank. Don't put it on anybody else. And just be very, very careful how much damage you're pumping on the pull, because those sorts of abilities will obscure what your real threat actually is. So I think that's pretty much all there is to talk about when it comes to the blood infusion. Just get your Blood Mirror debuff, drop it immediately, and then bite 3 people. It's really, really straightforward. You don't have to be the first bite. It makes it a lot easier, honestly, if you're not the first bite and you get the second one instead, because then you just have to get bitten by whoever is the first bite. And once you finish this, as long as you survive after you get your 4 stack of Gushing Wounds and have the debuff cleared, as long as you survive till the end of the fight, your infusion will complete, and you can turn it in at the entrance to get the next infusion, the Frost Infusion, where we are going to go to Sindragosa. So this one is really, really straightforward. On Sindragosa, she does a breath, a frost breath, and you just need to get hit by 4 of them while you're wielding Shadow's Edge. After you get hit by 4 of them, the 4th one will give you 2 things. One, a 6-minute infusion buff, just like on Putricide and the Unholy Infusion. It will also give you a ticking dot debuff that will deal some damage every second for the rest of the fight. So ideally, you just want your 4th last breath to happen within 6 minutes of the kill. It's a really good idea to just get the last breath during phase 3, just to make sure that the boss dies before the buff runs out. And also, it helps to reduce the amount of time that you have the ticking dot debuff. However, in my experience, it doesn't do that much damage anyway, so it's really not something you need to worry about. Now, there's a lot of different tricks for mitigating the damage done by the breath. We are going to be using Frost Resistance. Now, if you're a DK, you don't need as much Frost Resistance as I'm going to recommend in this video, and that's because you have so much more mitigation for magic damage than anybody else does. So if you're a DK, you've got the Icebound Fortitude, I think it's called. You have AMS. So if you're like a Paladin or a Warrior, all you really have is like Shield Wall, DSEC, AM, external cooldowns like that. These are all things you can use to mitigate the damage from the breath. Frost AM is really strong, DSEC as well. Single Sack even can be really good as well. So Sindragosa does also do a cleave. So in order to get the breath and not get cleaved, because you're not going to be tanking most likely, is to stand far enough in front of her that you get hit by the breath but not the cleave. So the breath has a really super long range, just like any other dragon's breath on any other dragon encounter that you're going to have in WoW. Right? The breath is super far range in a cone from her front. The cleave is only like 10 or 15 yards in front of her. So as long as you stand far enough back, you will get hit by the breath and nothing else. So use your cooldowns, use your personal and raid cooldowns, AM, DSAC, AMS, whatever. If you're a paladin, probably just heal yourself since you're just going to be standing there, and eat the breaths. Just make sure that you're not going out of range of your healers. Now make sure that you have your Shadow's Edge equipped and your Frost Resistance gear equipped. You actually can take Shadow's Edge off after you get the 6-minute buff and complete your infusion for the rest of the fight. Now this does actually make the fight harder in one specific way in Phase 3 or Stage 2, sub 35%, whatever you want to call it. So when you get targeted for the ice block, right? When she targets you for the ice block, if you have the infusion debuff and you're eating breaths, she actually will not block you. Like, you'll get the block on you, it'll count down, but you'll never actually get stuck in a block. So this actually has been known to wipe various raids because they can't clear their stacks, because you never turn into an ice block, so they have nothing to use to line of sight the boss and clear their stacks. If this happens, you're going to need to crank up the raid healing until the next person gets blocked. If you get 2 in a row, you might just wipe. Now, once you've gotten your last breath, you will get the 6-minute buff. You will also get a debuff that ticks for damage for the rest of the fight. It's not very dangerous in my experience. It doesn't do a whole lot of damage, but it is something to keep in mind, because if you die, you will not infuse. Once again, the buff has to be on you when the boss dies, so make sure that you do not die. Now, it should be safe to bubble at this point, but I'm not 100% sure on that. So if you're a paladin, you're looking to bubble because you think you might die, I can't guarantee that you will infuse. It will probably clear the Frost Infusion debuff, but I'm not 100% sure if that will be the case. But maybe it's a risk that you don't want to take. Now let's talk about the Frost Resistance, pretty much the only thing we have left to talk about. What Frost Resistance gear you might want to wear and how much. Now, if you have a prot off-spec or you just have a prot set laying around, especially the Frost Resistance set that you might use for tanking Sindragosa, this is what you're going to want to wear. You're going to want all the best frost resist items and enchants, and you're going to want to have as much stamina as possible to ensure that you stay alive through these breaths. This is the set that Light Club was recommending for Sindragosa tanking with tier 9 gear. It doesn't have tier 10 gear. It's based around early phase 4, which obviously we are much further into phase 4, so a lot of these items can be replaced with ICC gear. The main items we're going to be looking at are the frost resistance items and enchants that are present in the set. So let's go ahead and look at the very best frost resistance gear available. So the good part is that most of these items are BOE and very easily obtained, and you don't really need all of them to be successful, but having as many of them as you can is really going to help. So we have the Icebane set, which is Nax item level gear that you can craft. It's also very cheap on the auction house on most servers. That's the Icebane set, so they're loaded with stamina and frost resistance, and that's really all they have. You're going to want to gem them with pure stamina as well, just to ensure that you survive. You also have the Lesser Flask of Resistance, going to give you an extra 50 frost resistance. That's really going to help as well. Then you have the Cloak enchant, as you can see on the cloak here, 20 frost resistance enchant. That's very valuable. You have the Helm enchant on the helm here, 25 frost resistance. That's very valuable. And also the Onyxia helms have frost resistance on them. It's only 10, so it's not a big deal. But if you have one laying around, not a bad idea to throw it on and put a frost resistance enchant on it. Then you also have the Onyxia ring, which will give you 30 frost resistance as well, and a bunch of stamina. So that's always good. All of these items are very, very good. And you should just get all of the BOE ones if you can. Once again, they're very cheap on most servers. And the enchants. If you can't get the Onyxia items, you'll probably still be fine. Then once you add a flask on top of all that, and your frost resist aura that a paladin should be giving you, you're going to be pretty set for this infusion. Now let's talk about how much frost resistance specifically you're going to want to aim for, and how hard the breath actually hits. So there are not strict tiers for resistance like there were in previous expansions, but we do have certain breakpoints where if you are above that breakpoint, you have a minimum possible resist. So for example, if you have 340 frost resistance, the minimum that you can possibly resist is 30% of the damage. You can resist more, but you cannot resist less. This is because the more resistance you get, the lower possible resistances get pushed off the attack table, and you can only get the higher resistances. So if you are 340 frost resistance, the resisting 20% or 10% of the damage is pushed off of the attack table, and you can only resist 30% or more. Now on normal, as you can see, the unmitigated breath goes from anywhere between 35,000 damage to 40,000 damage. So the amount that you mitigate and the amount that you need to mitigate to survive is going to be dependent on how much resistance you have and how much health you have. That's why it's very important not just to have frost resistance, but to also have a lot of stamina. I ran about 465 resistance here, and as you can see, I mitigated 53 to 61% of the damage. This is of course on normal, but we will talk about heroic here in a second. Now, resistance is not your only tool for mitigating the damage. You also have various things you can do like absorbs. Make sure your priests are putting a shield on you. You can also use things like greater frost protection potions, although they're kind of a drop in the bucket. You can use things like sacred shield, etc. to mitigate more of the damage. And you will also want to use your raid cooldowns like frost, aura mastery, or DSAC, etc. Personal cooldowns like shield wall, and that's going to be really important on heroic, as you'll see here. Let's talk about how much damage you will take on heroic. So as you can see here, the frost breath hits a lot harder on heroic. The unmitigated damage will be anywhere from 45,000 to 60,000 damage. So this is quite a lot, and you are going to need to use every tool available to you to survive. I'm talking aura mastery, DSAC, shield wall, AMS, icebound fortitude, etc. These are all going to be very important and crucial to surviving on heroic. Now, this is going to be especially the case if you don't have a full tank set and a lot of stamina. If you don't have that much stamina, you probably want to make up for it by having even more frost resistance, and you can do this by using any old frost resistance item. Even like green items of frost resistance won't be the worst thing to use if you need to get that extra little bit of frost resistance. Remember, your damage here is not going to matter at all. All you need to do is make sure you complete your infusion properly. Now remember, you don't need to get all of the breaths in a row. You can take breaks in between the breaths. If you don't have a cooldown to use, maybe just go out, wait until your cooldowns come back up, and then go back in and start eating breaths again. So how much frost resistance do we really want to aim for here? Well, if you're a DK, you can probably go one tier below what I'm going to recommend here, because you have so many more tools and so much more magic damage mitigation to work with. So on normal, I would recommend everybody have at least 340 frost resistance just to make sure that you survive. Really not a hard amount to attain at all. If you are a DK, you can probably go with even less than that. On heroic, you really want to go to the next tier and have at least 510 frost resistance. If you're a DK, you'll probably be good with 340 or maybe a little bit more. Now, this won't make you survive every breath perfectly with no cooldown, so once again, on heroic, you're going to need to use your cooldowns well. It is too much to ask for people to go all the way up to 765. That's just too much frost resistance to really obtain. It's just not feasible. So that pretty much covers it for the Frost Infusion. The rest is really simple and straightforward, so we're just going to blast through it as quick as we possibly can. Congratulations on infusing and completing the Frost Infusion. Now the next part of the quest is to gather your Shadowfrost shards. So the next part of the chain is called the Splintered Throne, and it just asks you to come back with your 50 Shadowfrost shards and turn them in, and at this point you will get your Shadowmourne. Now these cannot be traded, so make sure your loot master gives them to you and nobody else. Also, the shard that comes from the Lich King requires you to take the resurrection at 10% and hit the boss before he dies. If you do not take the resurrection and hit the boss before he dies, you will lose the shard. Here is some basic math about how long it'll take you to collect your 50 shards. If you get a 50% drop chance, it's going to average you about 6 weeks, and I think that this is about the average for most people. You can see around 8 to 9 shards per week on average. You can get luckier or more unlucky, but I think most people are going to see around 8 to 9 shards per week. So you can expect to collect your 50 shards in 5 to 7 weeks. And once you've had your 50th shard in your bags, you now head to the front of the instance, turn them in to High Lord Mograine, and congratulations, you now get your legendary Shadowmourne Axe. Congratulations to everybody who made it this far. I really am very, very happy for you, and it is such an insane upgrade that you guys are definitely going to notice it immediately. It is very fun to play with, and as you guys will see, it does a lot of freaking damage. It is crazy how strong this item is. Now, this is not actually the end of the quest. You actually have another little part at the end where Mograine will ask you to go kill the Lich King with your Shadowmourne. Now, just like all the infusions, this part of the quest must be completed on 25-man mode. It doesn't have to be heroic, but it must be 25-man. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Once you've killed the boss, the quest will complete, and make sure you loot the boss. That is because when you're on this quest and you complete it, the boss will have an extra item of personal loot, not raid loot, personal loot that you can loot directly off the boss. It is called the sealed chest. Now, the sealed chest is an item that begins a quest, and it begins the quests that will give you all the extra rewards. So there's a mount, there's a tabard, there's a lot of cool stuff that you guys will see here in a minute, and you have to loot this while you're on the quest, because if you miss your chance, it's not like you can loot it again next week. It will never drop again. The only way to remedy the situation at this point is to file a ticket, and we all know how painfully long it can take for a GM to answer a ticket. So when you're on this quest, please do not forget to loot the boss. It's not something your raid master, loot master can do for you. You have to loot the boss yourself, because once again, this is personal loot. And that also means that ultimately it is your decision what happens with these items, because they are BOE or bind on use, as we'll see in a minute here. But because it's personal loot and you are the only person eligible for the quest, ultimately it's your decision what happens with it. So once you've accepted the quest, you will turn it in, and you will now get an unsealed chest that has 5 different items that, if you've cleared the instance, you will all take them to the beginning of the instance where Sylvanas and Mirrodin and all of those NPCs are going to be. And all you need to do is give each NPC their respective item, and then they will give you a reward. Now, these rewards are all bind on use or bind on equip, so you can give them to anybody you want, or you can sell them on the auction house. That's all perfectly kosher. There is a pretty cool mount, the Reigns of the Crimson Death Charger. It's kind of a reskin for the DK mount, but it's a little bit more detailed, and in my opinion, it's probably the coolest looking ground mount in the game. So that is probably the best reward. Then you also have the Frost Dwarf toy that you get called Mirrodin's Favor. Allows you to turn into a Frost Dwarf for 10 minutes every 30 minutes. Really, really fun to raid with, especially if you don't like the way your character looks, or you just think the Frost Dwarf looks really cool. It's kind of like wearing a Savory Deviant Delight or something in raid. You also have the Tabard of the Lightbringer. Has a really cool on-use effect that makes you glow into a giant ball of light for 5 minutes every 30 minutes. Also really cool. Plus, it also looks not too bad. Personally, I think it's one of the cooler looking tabards in the game at this point. You also get Sylvanas' music box, which will summon some banshees that will cause everybody around you to hear the song Lament of the Highborn, which is a pretty cool song. Nice little toy. And the last item you can get is Jaina's Locket. Now, this one is actually the only item that is not a toy. It will not go into your collections like the other items will. So that means that this is the only item that is not account wide. So it doesn't really make sense for this to go to like a mage, because they already have a portal. It just allows you to create a portal to Dalaran. So when I let my guild roll on this item, I basically said anybody can roll on this except for mages, because it just doesn't make sense for them to use it. And that's really it. Those are all the items you're going to get from the final leg of the quest, and that is the end of the quest chain. So now you have your Shadowmourne, you have all your rewards, you can do whatever you want with them, and you are ready to blast. Now, one final question I wanted to address in this video, a question I got the other day on my previous Shadowmourne Infusion video, is can you do multiple infusions at the same time? A lot of guilds, might be working on their second Shadowmourne at this point, but they might want to get their third Shadowmourne ready at the same time. So yes, it is actually possible to get multiple infusions at the same time on the same kill. But it's going to be really, really hard for Unholy, because not only do you need one person to use 100 energy in the Abomination on infusing their weapon, if you want a second person to do it, then you need 200 energy, which means that you're just not going to have really any energy for slowing oozes. So on Heroic, that's going to be close to impossible. But the Blood Infusion and the Frost Infusion should be pretty easy to do with 2 people at once. All you need to do is have both of them eating the breaths on Frost Infusion, and on the Blood Infusion, you just have one of them get the first bite, and the other guy get the second bite, or have both of them get the second bite. And as long as you get 5 bites total, no problem at all, as long as both of them got Blood Mirror at the very beginning of the fight. So not a problem at all to do 2 at once if that's what you guys want to do, except for the Unholy Infusion, which you probably should be doing 1 at a time. So that's going to be it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope that this helps anybody who's still working on their Shadowmourne Infusions or the quest in general. I'm sorry that this took so long to get out. I know that I already had a Shadowmourne Infusions video, but I wanted to improve it. I wanted to make it better. I wanted to fix some mistakes. And I wanted to cover some stuff that I didn't cover the first time around, just to make it more comprehensive. I know that at this point, people are working on their second Shadowmourne. They're probably going to have it this week or next week. So this might be a little bit late, but hopefully this still helps some people out there who are going to be completing their infusion soon or in the future. So not only did I have all those delays that I mentioned at the beginning of the video, but I also, like 2 weeks ago, I was about ready to sit down and finish this video and just get ready to edit the rest of it. And then I just got obliterated by like the worst case of COVID I've ever had in my entire life. I'm actually kind of still dealing with the brain fog. I just feel like I can't think straight. So I just want to thank you guys for being patient. Like I said, I still hope this helps a lot of people out there. And regarding Season of Discovery, I am playing it. I'm a little bit behind on leveling due to COVID. I'm only level 16, but I'm about to finish leveling up to 25 this week. And I do have new content coming regarding that. I have a new video that I'm going to be trying to get out sometime this week about seal twisting in Season of Discovery and why we need to have proper Seal of Command, Seal of Martyr twisting. I think it would add a lot to the game. I think it would add a lot to the Paladin experience. I'm also probably going to start writing articles for Wowhead regarding Season of Discovery, and maybe also like Phase 5 Bis list for Wrath as well, now that Ruby Sanctum is on the horizon. So you guys can look forward to those Wowhead articles probably sometime in the future. Hopefully sometime here in the next week or 2, I will get my GPU fixed, because the fans just refuse to spin and it just keeps overheating, which is really a total pain. So hopefully we get that figured out here soon. Thanks again, guys, for being so patient, and we'll see you next time. Once again, I hate saying this. It really makes me cringe, like deep down in my soul. But if you guys like the video, you want to see more like this, like, comment, subscribe. It really helps with the algorithm and just promoting the video and getting it seen by more people. So thank you so much if you choose to do that. If you want to support me in other ways, you can check that out in the description. Otherwise, everybody have a good day, and we'll see you next time.
This show was brought to you by Light Club, where monkeys go to church.